One day, in the old days, in the days of Baghdad, there was a merchant, Qasim bin Idris, and he was a silk merchant. And one day he went on pilgrimage, and he went to the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. And after he had performed his pilgrimage and he was on his way back, and he was passing through the city of Medina where the Holy Prophet is buried, he looked down, and there, while he was traveling on his camel along the road, he saw a small package. It looked like a small bag, and it looked like it was made of leather. And he got down and he stopped his camel and he looked and he got down and he picked up that bag. And he opened it up. And there inside that bag was a simple ring, a simple silver ring. And he was kind of disappointed because he was a wealthy man and he had no need of anything beyond his silks and the things that he traded in. He had a palace in Baghdad. So a simple silver ring, but there was something about the ring that fascinated him. And then he saw that it was tied up with a small piece of leather. And he unfolded that leather, and there on that leather it said, "This is the ring of 7. This is a wish ring. There is 7 wishes on this ring, and each person that comes in the possession of this ring can make one wish that will become irrevocably true." Well, his chest swelled, and his heart was happy. A wish ring, what more could one wish for in this life? A wish that could make anything that one wanted be fulfilled. Well, he put that ring back in his pocket because he wasn't sure what to wish for, and he traveled on to Baghdad. And just when the towers and the palaces and the domes of Baghdad became visible in the distance after several weeks, he thought again of that ring and he pulled it out. And he put it on his finger. And he rode into the city. And as he rode into the city, the next day, it was time to go visit the Caliph. It was time to go pay his respect to the palace, because he was a wealthy man and he'd been on pilgrimage. So he took the best cloth of Syrian silk, a beautiful cloth of red Syrian silk that he had. And he walked down to the palace. And he walked into the reception room where the Caliph was receiving the people on that day. And as he stood there and looked at the beauty around him and looked at the majesty around him, his heart knew what it wanted. Because the thing that he did not have beyond his riches was power over the kingdom and power over everyone around him. And there as he stood in front of the Caliph's throne and handed him that beautiful bolt of red Syrian silk, he made his wish and said, "I wish to be the Khalifa." And suddenly it was as if he got spun around and almost lost consciousness. And when he came to and he looked out, suddenly there he was sitting on the throne. And as he looked down, he saw himself standing before him. And he looked, and he was now the Khalifa. And the Khalifa, who was now a silk merchant standing before the throne, took his leave rapidly and did not seem sorry at all that something so strange and wondrous had happened. And there Qasim bin Idris sat on the throne, and now he was the mightiest man in the land. And since he had all the power and might in the kingdom, he made laws, and he made this law, and he made that law. But one who is born a merchant has not always been taught to rule, and before long this law contradicted that law, and this law contradicted that law, and the Khalifa, who had always been considered a just ruler by his people, started making laws that only caused confusion and more confusion in that kingdom. And before many weeks had gone by, there were stories of uprisings in the provinces. And since he had not been made a soldier, he did not know what to do. And before a month had gone by, there was revolution in all parts of the kingdom. And he made laws, and one only made it worse over the other. And before 2 months had gone by, the armies of the generals that had revolted against him stood at the walls of Baghdad. And he shook his head and he said, "Ah!" And he looked at the ring on his finger, and he realized that time had come, and he took that ring off his finger, and on that piece of leather parchment he wrote, "Power alone will not make one happy." And he wrapped that ring in that parchment, and he told one of his servants to take it to the market. And there that servant dropped it outside a shoemaker's stall of Yusuf bin Ahmed. Well, just then, the poor shoemaker who had come back from his prayers in the mosque walked up to his stall, and he saw the servant drop that package outside his stall. And he picked it up and he walked into his stall. But since he was a poor shoemaker and he had not learned how to read or write, he went to his friend. And his friend was the writer and the reader in that marketplace. So he walked to him and he showed him his gift. And he opened it and said, "Ah, my friend, this is a wish ring, and one wish will be granted to you irrevocably, and if it comes, which will come true." And Yusuf, he was a happy man. And he thought about what wish he would wish for. Well, that very afternoon it so happened that one of the people of the palace came to him and bought the very, very best pair of shoes that he had, and paid him with a gold coin, the very first gold coin he had ever had in his life. And as he touched that gold coin, a wish arose in his heart, and he says, "I wish that every time I touch a gold coin, it will double." Well, he touched that coin and it doubled, and he touched another one and it doubled, and it doubled, and it doubled, and before long a pile of gold coins was lying on the table before him. And our simple shoemaker, who had been happy making shoes all that day, looked at that gold and thought, "Now what can I do?" And he went home to his wife and showed her the bag of gold he had obtained. And before long he sold the small house that they were living in, and they bought a big mansion on the side of town. And he went around the town and bought the best of things. But it so happened that his brother-in-law, Khalid, knew exactly. And he wondered where the wealth had come from, because Yusuf had said that an inheritance had come to him, and suddenly he had become a wealthy man. But Khalid knew there was no one in the family from whom an inheritance could come. So he followed Yusuf around the town of Baghdad, and every day he would follow him, wondering where his wealth had come from, until one day he saw Yusuf walking into the best of jewelry stores in Baghdad. And there, as he stood by the counter looking at the treasures on the shelves, Khalid walked in and says, "Look at this, you wealthy man, but look at these things. These things are better than a sultan could buy." And he looked at the jeweled cups on the shelf, and the beautiful things that were standing there, rubies covered with rubies, and jewels and pearls and diamonds. And he said, "Ah, no one could afford this but the sultan, but the Caliph himself." "Ah," Yusuf said, since now he was wealthier than any man in the kingdom, a little pride crept into his heart. He says, "Anything in this shop I want, I can afford." And then, fool that he was, he took out that coin and he says, "That, for example, bring it to me." Well, the jeweler brought it to him, and he touched that coin, and it multiplied, and it multiplied, and it multiplied, and it kept on multiplying until there was enough money there to pay for that cup studded with rubies and pearls and diamonds. But of course now his brother-in-law and the jeweler both knew the secret of his wealth, and they would not be contented until he would share with them, because they said otherwise they would go to the sultan and tell him about this great ring. So from that day on, not only did he have to make money for his own family, but every day his brother-in-law would come and the jeweler would come. And before long, there would be throngs of beggars at his door, begging, because now everyone knew he had money in Baghdad, and people would try and break into his house and steal his things. And before long, his fingers became sore from multiplying the money, and not a moment of rest was given to him, because everyone clamored for the money he had. And one day he walked to the market to his friend who was the writer and says, my days before, I went to the mosque and I came back and I made shoes. And I was a happy man. And all I did was go to the mosque and pray and come back and make shoes. And now everyone is clamoring for my money and never a moment's rest do I have. Well, he knew it was time to give up that ring. And he shook his head and he took out that parchment and wrote, and wealth alone will not make one happy either. So he wrapped up that ring and he left it on a ledge in the town. And just after he left it on the ledge of the town, who would come by? But Rahman. Abdurrahman, who was the sailor and trader who sailed the far seas. And he saw that package on the ledge and he took it and he opened it up. And he saw that silver ring. And he says, of course, power and wealth will not make one happy by themselves. No, I have to think of a better wish. Well, thus he went on. And he was on his way from Baghdad to the city of Jaffa. And there he would buy a ship and he would sail out upon the sea. Well, he came to the city of Jaffa and he bought a ship and he sailed out upon the sea. And there, when he was out upon the sea, he looked out over the boundless main and he looked out over the waves and he said, I know what my wish should be. For someone like me traveling into the unknown, it would be good if only I could see what is hidden in the unknown ahead of me. Well, just then, as he stood there and Allah took away the veil, God took away the veil of the unseen before him, he looked down and there he saw that the boat that he had bought was not such a great boat after all, because it had been covered up with tar and the planks were rotten. And then when he looked further down into the sea, he saw part of a body which has once been a human being, which was now being eaten by the sharks. And then in the far distance he saw a tornado, he saw a hurricane come down the sea. And he saw how it would shatter his boat and how he would become shipwrecked. And then when he looked back at the city where he had come from, he saw how his wife was entertaining in his very own house his greatest enemy, the wealthy jeweler who lived on the corner of his street. And so on and on he saw down the future. And he realized that maybe his wish had not been such a great wish at all. And far down the future, after his shipwreck, and he had shipwrecked and landed safely on the shore of the desert and had survived terrible travails in the desert, he saw himself married to a woman with another child. But he realized that maybe there was a reason why God had hidden the future from people and why it was better not to know what would be ahead of them. And he asked for God to screen, please, some of this future. And when he landed and after his shipwreck and his terrible travails, he took that ring and he took it off his finger and he wrote on that parchment, do not wish to see what Allah has hidden for you in the unseen. And he folded up that ring and he wrapped it in parchment and he took it to the market, and there again he left it on the wall.